The snow fell hard that day. 'Twas the kind of cold that bit through clothing and made the air feel sharp in the lungs. Mark pulled his coat tighter as he trudged through the alien village, his boots crunching over frozen ground. The wind carried fine crystals of snow that stung his cheeks and blurred his vision. He had been here before, trading supplies for dried food and tools, but never during winter. This place was harsher than the colonies on the human side of the planet. The locals, tall, thin aliens with pale skin and dark eyes, moved quickly, heads down. Wanting to get inside before the storm worsened, Mark kept his gaze on the path ahead, eager to reach the tavern and warm his hands by a fire. That was when he saw her. At first, she was just a shape small, unmoving, standing near the side of a boarded-up shop. Snow was collecting on her shoulders, in her hair, and on the thin dress that clung to her frame. She didn't move even. As the wind pushed against her, Mark slowed. Something was wrong. As he stepped closer, he saw her lips. They were a deep shade of blue, almost purple. And her skin was pale, not the natural pale of her people, but the sickly pale of someone who'd been in the cold too long. Her eyes, wide and glassy, locked onto his dot. In her trembling hands, she held a sign. It was a piece of scrap cardboard, the edges torn and curling from damp. The words on it were written in her native script, the lines shaky and uneven. Mark's translator chip buzzed softly in his ear and gave him the message. Please, save me. The words stopped him. For a moment, he wasn't sure if he'd read it right. Save her? From what? Snow swirled around them. The street was almost empty now. A few villagers passed on the other side, giving her quick, sharp glances, but not stopping. Some even turned their faces away. Mark's breath misted in the air. Are you all right? He asked. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She looked down at the sign, then back at him, as if willing him to understand. Mark stepped closer, crouching a little so his face was level with hers. Where's your family? He asked softly. Her head shook slowly. Snowflakes clung to her hair. She pressed the sign tighter against her chest, as if it was the only thing keeping her upright. Mark looked around. No one's helping you. A merchant standing in a doorway nearby snorted. Leave her, human, he said, in a low, dismissive tone. She's trouble. Mark ignored him. He could see the girl's legs shaking. She wouldn't last long out here. Come on, he said gently, offering his gloved hand. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, as if making a desperate decision, she reached out and took it. Her fingers were ice cold, colder than he thought possible for living skin. He led her toward the nearest food stall, one with an old heater glowing faintly inside. The owner frowned but didn't say anything as they sat at a corner table. Mark moved the heater closer to her, rubbing her hands gently to help the blood flow. She winced at the warmth at first, then slowly relaxed. Her lips parted, and in a hoarse whisper, she said something. What was that? Mark leaned closer. She tried again, the words barely audible. Hungry? Mark ordered hot broth, paying extra to make sure it was served quickly. When it arrived, she cupped the bowl with both hands, her fingers twitching as the heat spread through them. She drank slowly at first, then faster, until the bowl was empty. Mark watched her carefully. She looked no older than 12, maybe 13. Her thin dress was ripped in places. No coat. No shoes, only torn fabric wrapped around her feet. He reached for the sign she had placed on the table. The front said, Please, save me. But as he turned it over, he saw faint writing on the back. The translator worked again, and his stomach tightened at the words, I will work. I will do anything. Just don't let me die here. Mark looked at her. She was watching him closely now, her eyes searching his face, waiting for his reaction. Who left you out there? He asked. Her eyes darted toward the door, then back to the table. "No one wants me," she whispered. Before Mark could say anything else, he noticed movement outside the stall. Two tall figures had stopped across the street. They were watching, no, staring through the snowfall, their eyes locked on the girl. The girl saw them too. Her hands tightened around the empty bowl. Her breathing quickened. Mark frowned. "Do you know them?" She shook her head quickly, but her fear was obvious. The two figures exchanged a glance, then slowly began walking toward the door. The heater's soft hum seemed suddenly loud in the silence. Mark's instincts told him one thing: whatever this girl's story was, it wasn't simple. And someone else clearly wanted her. He didn't know yet if he was about to make the best decision of his life or the worst. But as the figures reached for the door handle, Mark knew one thing for certain: he couldn't just leave her. The door to the food stall creaked open. A blast of cold wind swirled in, carrying more snow with it. The two tall figures stepped inside. Their boots left wet prints on the wooden floor, and their long coats dripped melted ice. Mark kept his face calm, but inside, every muscle was tense. The girl shrank into her seat, pulling her thin dress tighter around her shoulders as if trying to disappear. The first figure, man with skin almost gray and eyes like polished stones, looked around slowly before speaking. "Human," he said in a low, smooth voice. "Have you seen a child outside? She's small, weak, a danger to herself." Mark pretended to think. "No," he said casually. "Just came in from the cold myself." The second figure's gaze swept the stall, stopping on the girl for only a second before moving on. His eyes narrowed, but he didn't speak. The two exchanged a glance, something silent passing between them, then turned and left without another word. The door shut behind them, but the air in the stall stayed heavy. The girl's hands shook as she set her bowl down. "They will come back," she whispered. Mark leaned in. "Who are they?" She shook her head quickly, her wet hair brushing her face. "If I tell you, you'll send me away." Mark looked at the sign again. Those desperate words on the back wouldn't leave his mind. "I will do anything. Just don't let me die here." "I'm not sending you anywhere," he said slowly, "but I need to know what's going on." She stared at him for a long moment, as if weighing whether she could trust him. Finally, she whispered, "They're hunters. They're paid to take me back, or kill me if I run." Mark's jaw tightened. "Why?" She looked down at her lap. "Because I'm not supposed to exist." Before he could ask more, the stall owner, a short, broad alien with scales along his jaw, walked over. "Human," he said in a warning tone. "Leave her. You don't know what you're touching." Mark met his eyes. "She's freezing and starving." "I'm not leaving her." The owner's gaze softened just slightly, but his voice stayed firm. "You think you're helping her? But there are laws here. Old ones. She is from the bloodline of the exiles. No one shelters them. No one feeds them. It is better you walk away before they mark you too." The girl flinched at the words, but didn't argue. Mark knew then that whatever this was, it went deeper than hunger or cold. This wasn't just about survival, it was about something buried in history. Something the village feared enough to turn away a dying child. He slid his coat off and draped it over her shoulders. She froze, her fingers gripping the thick fabric, as if it were gold. "You'll come with me," he said. Her head snapped up. "They'll find us. Then we'll make sure they don't." Mark tossed a few credits on the table and stood. He kept his eyes on the door, half expecting the hunters to return any second. Snow hit his face as they stepped outside, the wind biting through his clothes now that his coat was on her. The street was nearly empty, but Mark didn't relax. The girl walked close beside him, her small hand clinging to his. She didn't speak. But her grip told him everything. She was terrified. They passed a row of shuttered shops, their signs half buried in snow. At the end of the street, an old woman stood in a doorway. Her wrinkled face hidden under a hood. As they passed, she hissed, "Human." "Stop." Mark hesitated, turning slightly. The woman's dark eyes darted to the girl, then back to him. "You don't know what she is," the woman whispered. "She carries the mark of the condemned. If you keep her, they will hunt you across worlds." Mark studied her face. "And if I leave her," the woman's lips pressed into a thin line, "she will not see the sunrise." The girl's grip tightened, painfully. "Please," she whispered to Mark, her voice breaking. "Don't leave me." The wind howled down the street, carrying the faint sound of voices, not close, but not far either. Mark didn't need to be told twice. He led the girl away, moving fast, turning down narrow alleys where the snow piled higher and the shadows were deeper. When they reached the small cabin he had rented for the week, Mark pushed the door open and ushered her inside. The cabin was little more than one room with a stove and a cot, but it was warm and dry. "Sit," he told her. She obeyed, curling up on the cot with the coat still wrapped around her. Her eyes followed him as he checked the windows and bolted the door. "They won't stop," she said softly. Mark crouched in front of her. "Then tell me why." For a long time, she didn't answer. Finally, in a voice so small, he almost didn't. "Hear it," she said, "because I'm the last one left." The fire popped in the stove. Snow tapped against the window. And outside, somewhere in the storm, Mark thought he heard the crunch of footsteps in the snow. The sound came again, soft, steady, too deliberate to be the wind. Footsteps. Mark moved quietly to the window, peeling back the edge of the curtain. Shapes moved in the swirling snow. Hard to see, but definitely there. 2, maybe 3 figures. Heads turning slowly as they searched the street. The girl sat frozen on the cot, her eyes wide. She knew they were here. Mark dropped the curtain and crossed to the stove, pretending to busy himself with the fire so she wouldn't panic. "They haven't seen us yet," he said quietly, "but you need to tell me everything, now." She bit her lip hard enough that it almost bled. "If I tell you, you'll think I'm cursed." Mark crouched in front of her, meeting her gaze. "I don't believe in curses. I believe in people needing help. And you need help." Her breath came fast. "I am from the Chiron line. Long ago, my people ruled this region, but they were overthrown. The victors made a lift. A Chiron was ever born again. They must be hunted down before they grow old enough to claim the throne." Mark's frown deepened. "That's genocide." She nodded slowly. "No one will feed me, or give me shelter. If they do, they will be punished too." Mark understood now why even the old woman had told him to leave her. But understanding didn't make it easier to accept. He glanced toward the door, and those two outside. "They're bounty hunters," she whispered. "They work for the council. They'll take me, or kill me here, so they don't have to carry me through the snow." The footsteps outside grew closer. The floorboards seemed to hum with the faint vibration of someone walking right past the cabin. Mark's instincts screamed to move. "We need to keep you out of sight." She looked around desperately. "Where?" Mark knelt and pulled open the loose floorboard he'd noticed earlier in the week. Beneath was a shallow crawl space, just big enough for a person to curl up in. "Get in, stay quiet, no matter what." Her eyes filled with fear. "What if they find you?" He forced a small smile. "I'm good at talking my way out of trouble." She slid into the space, the coat still wrapped around her. And Mark replaced the board just as a sharp knock rattled the door. Mark took a breath, then opened. One of the hunters stood there, snow clinging to his coat. His cold, stone-like eyes scanned the room. "Human," he said, slowly. "We're looking for a girl, small, thin. She carries a sign." Mark leaned against the doorframe, forcing his tone to stay casual. "I haven't seen anyone like that. Since I came in from the storm." The hunter's gaze flicked past him, toward the cot. "You're alone?" Mark gave a short nod. "Unless you count the fire." The hunter's lips curled slightly, almost a smile, but without warmth. "If you see her and you help her, you take her crime as your own." "What crime is that?" Mark asked, his voice sharper now. The hunter stepped closer, the air between them heavy, existing. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then the hunter stepped back and turned away, his boots crunching in the snow as he rejoined. The others, Mark shut the door, bolted it, and exhaled. He lifted the floorboard. "They're gone," he whispered. The girl crawled out slowly, her small frame trembling. "You lied for me?" "I'm not letting them take you," Mark said firmly. "But we can't stay here. By morning, they'll search every building." I nodded, clutching the coat tighter. "There's a path through the woods. I've used it before when I ran, but it's dangerous in the dark." Before Mark could answer, there was a knock-knock on the door, but on the back wall. 3 quick taps. Mark tensed. "Stay here," he told her, moving toward the sound. He opened the rear hatch cautiously. An old alien woman stood there. Same one who had warned him earlier in the street. "You're still here," she said quietly. "Foolish human." Mark glanced past her into the storm. "Why are you here?" "Tell you the hunters know you have her," she said. "They'll be back before dawn. If you want to live, you must leave now." The girl's voice came from behind him, small but urgent. "Why are you helping us?" The woman's eyes softened. "Because once I had a daughter like you, and no one helped her." Mark didn't hesitate. "Then show us the safest way out." The woman nodded once. "Follow me. But you must move. Quietly, if they hear you in the snow, they'll run you down before you reach the trees." Mark pulled on his coat, then wrapped a blanket around the girl's shoulders. The wind outside was cruel, the cold biting instantly at his skin. But they stepped into the night without looking back. Somewhere in the dark, a low horn sounded a hunter's call. The chase had begun. The wind cut like knives as they left the village behind. The snow swirled so thick that Mark could barely see the woman ahead of them. She moved fast for her age, her hood pulled low, her long staff leaving deep marks in the drifts. The girl clung to Mark's hand, her blanket flapping in the wind. Every few steps, she stumbled in the deep snow, and Mark would lift her just enough to keep her moving. Behind them, the horn sounded again, closer now. "They know we left," the girl said in a trembling voice. "They'll have dogs," the old woman muttered without turning around. "We must be in the trees before they release them." Mark's jaw tightened. Dogs in this cold meant trouble. Their scenting ability would be deadly. The path sloped downward, the snow crunching and shifting under their boots. Ahead, a line of black trees cut across the white landscape, a dark forest that looked like it could swallow them whole. The old woman stopped at the edge, her breath misting in the air. "In here, your tracks will hide under the branches," she said. "Make no sound. Sound carries far in the snow." They slipped between the trees. The forest was eerily still, the snow on the branches muffling the world. Mark could hear nothing but their own breathing until a faint, rhythmic crunch. Crunch, crunch reached his ears. He froze. The sound wasn't theirs. Through the gaps in the trees, he saw movement. 3 hunters, tall and fast, scanning the ground. One carried a lantern that swung from his hand, casting an orange glow across the white snow. The girl's grip on his hand tightened. The old woman hissed, "Off the path." They ducked behind a fallen tree, crouching low. The hunters moved past, but one stopped suddenly, raising his head like he was listening. The girl's breathing grew shaky. Mark put a hand gently over her mouth, his other hand gripping the handle. Of the small blade at his belt, the hunter took a step toward them. Then another. His eyes scanned the shadows between the trees. The old woman raised her staff slightly ready to strike, but a sharp howl split the night. It came from deeper in the forest, far to their left. The hunter turned his head toward the sound. After a long pause, he moved away. Following his companions toward the howl, Mark let out a slow breath and uncovered the girl's mouth. "We keep moving," he whispered. They pushed deeper into the forest. The ground began to change, the snow thinner here, the roots of the trees jutting up in twisted patterns. Mark noticed strange symbols carved into some of the trunk circles, lines and shapes that looked like eyes. The old woman noticed his glance. "Old warnings," she said. "This forest is not safe, but tonight it's safer than the hunters." They walked for what felt like hours. The girl was shivering hard now, even under the blanket. Mark could feel the tremors in her small hand. Finally, they came to a frozen stream. The ice glistened pale blue in the faint light. The old woman stopped. "We follow this north," she said. "It will take you to the mountain pass." "I cannot go further." Mark frowned. "Why not?" Her gaze shifted to the dark beyond the stream. "This is as far as I dare, and my face is known. If they catch me beyond my land, they will kill me with no trial." Mark nodded slowly. "Thank you." The girl stepped forward and surprised the old woman with a hug. "Thank you for not looking away," she whispered. The old woman's hand lingered on the girl's shoulder. "Survive, child. That will be your revenge." Then she turned and disappeared into the trees. Mark and the girl crossed the stream carefully, the ice groaning under their weight. On the other side, the trees grew even denser, their branches tangled like fingers. They hadn't gone far when a sharp, cold bark rang out behind them. Mark's heart dropped dog's dot. The girl looked back, her eyes wide. "They've released them." Mark scooped her up without a word and started running. The forest floor was uneven, roots and rocks hidden under the snow. His boots slipped, but he kept going, weaving between trees. The barking grew louder, joined by the crunch of many feet, both human and animal. Ahead, the trees thinned, revealing a steep rise. Mark climbed it fast, every muscle burning. At the top, he spotted a hollow beneath a massive fallen log. It was barely big enough, but it would do. He slid inside with the girl, pulling snow over the entrance to hide them. The air inside was cold and still. The barking drew closer, then stopped. Mark could hear the hunters' voices, low and tense. One set of footsteps crunched past, so close that snow from their boots sifted into the hollow. Then, silence. The girl's breath was warm against his chest. He could feel her heart pounding. They stayed there, motionless, listening, until the only sound left was the faint hiss of the wind through the trees. Mark didn't know if the hunters had moved on, or if they were still out there waiting. They waited in the hollow until the cold began to bite through their clothes and into their bones. Mark knew they couldn't stay there much longer. If the hunters had passed, good. If they were still nearby, waiting, then staying meant freezing to death. Mark shifted slightly and whispered, "We move now." The girl nodded, her eyes still wide with fear. He crawled out first, brushing away the snow that covered the entrance. The forest was quiet, but quiet didn't mean safe. He scanned the shadows between the trees, no shapes, no movement. Still, he felt eyes on them. They continued north, following the faint slope of the ground until the trees opened up to a clearing. Beyond the clearing lay a frozen expanse of pale blue under the moonlight, a wide river, locked in ice. The girl, stopped at the edge. "We can't cross that," she said, her voice trembling. Mark tested the ice with his boot. It groaned faintly, but didn't break. "We can," he said firmly. "We have to. If we stay on this side, they'll catch us. On the other side is the mountain pass." She hesitated, but when he held out his hand, she took it. Together, they stepped onto the ice. The frozen river stretched far, the opposite bank a dark line. In the distance, each step made the ice creak and shift under them. Mark kept them close to a narrow ridge of snow that ran down the middle, thinking it might be thicker there, halfway across. The sound reached them. A faint crack. Mark froze. The girl looked at him with panic in her eyes. "Is it breaking?" Before he could answer, another sound cut through the night shouting. Mark turned his head and saw figures emerging from the trees on the far side they had left behind. The hunters, they were running now, their boots striking the ice hard enough to echo. The moonlight glinted off their weapons. "Run," Mark said. Pulling the girl forward, they raced across the ice, their feet slipping. The girl stumbled, and Mark caught her, lifting her up without breaking stride. The hunters shouted again, and a sharp pop echoed one of them had fired a weapon. The ice ahead exploded into shards, spraying cold water into the air. Mark veered to the left, his heart pounding. The ice beneath them groaned louder. Cracked spiderwebbing out from the spot where the shot had hit. Another shot rang out, this one hitting closer. The ice beneath his boots gave a sharp warning creak. He knew they had seconds before it collapsed. He spotted a stretch where snow had piled high over the ice. "There," he shouted. They sprinted for it, the girl clinging to him as he ran. He could hear the hunters gaining. When they reached the snowy patch, the ice felt thicker under his boots. Mark set the girl down and kept moving, urging her to run ahead. "Don't stop, no matter what." She obeyed, her small legs pumping. As fast as they could, the hunters were halfway across now, their heavy steps shaking the ice. One of them shouted something in a language Mark didn't understand, and another gunshot rang, out this time aimed not at them, but at the ice directly in front of the girl. The shot blew open a jagged hole. The girl skidded to a stop, her eyes wide as freezing water sloshed up. Mark grabbed her and swung her to the side. Landing hard on his knees, but keeping her out of the water, the hunters were closing in. One of them raised his weapon again, aiming straight at Mark. Mark's eyes darted to the cracks spreading across the ice between them. If the ice broke under the hunter's weight, he pulled the girl close and shouted, "Hold on to me." Then, he slammed his boot down hard again and again on the cracked ice at their feet. The surface groaned, split, and with a sharp, echoing crack, a massive section gave way. Water rushed up in a freezing surge, spilling into the gap. The hunters nearest to them staggered, their feet plunging through. One went under entirely, vanishing. With a splash, the others stumbled back, shouting. Mark didn't wait to see if they'd recover. He pulled the girl across the last stretch of ice, leaping to the solid snow of the far bank. They collapsed together on the ground, both gasping for breath. The wind howled around them, but for the first time since they'd left the village. There was no immediate sound of pursuit. The girl looked up at him, her cheeks pale, but her eyes bright. You saved me again." Mark shook his head, still catching his breath. "We're not safe yet, but we bought ourselves time." Behind them, the broken section of ice groaned again. The hunters' shouts faded into the distance. Ahead, the black silhouette of the mountains rose against the star-filled sky. Somewhere beyond them was Safety V. They could survive the climb. The wind was quieter now. The mountains loomed closer, their jagged peaks cutting into the night sky. The stars above shone bright, cold, and distant. Mark led the girl along a narrow path that twisted upward between ridges. The snow here was thinner, the ground hard, and uneven. Each step crunched softly, the sound swallowed by the vast silence. After the chaos on the ice, the quiet felt strange, most dangerous. Mark kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see lantern light bobbing in the distance. But the river was far behind them now. And the hunters, if they survived the freezing water, would need time to find another way across. The girl walked beside him, the blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. She hadn't spoken since they left the riverbank. Her eyes stayed on the ground, her expression unreadable. "You holding up?" Mark asked gently. She nodded without looking up. "I'm fine." "You're not fine," he said softly. "But you're still walking. That counts for something." They climbed until the path widened into a small plateau. From here, they could see the dark valley below, the frozen river winding like a silver scar through the landscape. The view was breathtaking, but Mark's eyes were drawn to the distant flicker of lights moving along the far shore. "They're still coming," he said quietly. The girl's shoulders sank a little. "They always will." Mark crouched beside her. "That's what I need to understand. Why? Why would they send hunters after a child?" She didn't answer right away. The wind tugged at her blanket. Her lips parted, then closed again, as if the words hurt to say. "I told you before," she whispered. "I'm the last Chiron." But that's not all. Mark waited, letting the silence work on her. Finally, she turned to face him. "My blood. It's a key, a real one. There is an old place, far from here, an ancient vault, built before my people fell. Inside it is something that Council fears. Weapons, maybe, or knowledge. No one knows for sure, but only someone of Chiron blood can open it." Mark's brow furrowed. "And they think you'll open it? They think others will use me to open it, to bring back the Chiron rule." She looked down at her hands. "I don't want to rule anything. I don't even want to go near that place. I just want to live somewhere warm, where no one knows my name." Her voice broke on the last word. Mark felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. This wasn't just a girl running from cruelty. This was a girl who carried the reason for that cruelty in her veins. "They don't care what you want," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No. To them, I'm not a person. I'm a danger that has to be erased." The cold wind hissed over the plateau, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mark reached into his coat and pulled out a small packet of dried fruit from his supplies. "Eat," he said. She hesitated, then took it with both hands, chewing slowly. The simple act of eating seemed to calm her a little. "When was the last time you were safe?" Mark asked. She frowned, as if the question confused her. "I don't remember. Maybe when I was very small. My mother used to hum to me. We had a little room above a shop in a city far from here. But one night, the hunters came. She told me to run, and I did." Mark studied her, and she, the girl, shook her head. "I never saw her again." Silence hung heavy between them. Mark stood and looked toward the mountains. "All right," he said finally. "We'll find somewhere they can't reach you." Her eyes widened. "You believe me? You're not afraid?" Mark smiled faintly. "Afraid? Yes, but I'm more afraid of what happens if I do nothing." Something in her posture changed, then just slightly. A small straightening of her back, a faint light in her eyes. No one had ever said that to her before. They started walking again, the path narrowing as it wound higher. The wind grew sharper, carrying flakes of snow that stung their faces. Night was deepening when they reached a narrow ridge. On the far side lay a steep drop, the valley floor almost invisible in the dark. Somewhere down there, a faint howl rose, whether it was wind or an animal. Mark couldn't tell. They pressed on, the girl's small hand gripping his tightly. Halfway across, Mark paused. A faint light glowed ahead a campfire. Not large, but enough to cast shadows of two figures sitting beside it. Their shapes were wrong for villagers. Too tall, too still. Hunters the girl's breath caught. They're here too. Marks. Eyes narrowed. Seems they took a shortcut. The path offered no other way forward. Going back meant risking running straight into the others, chasing from behind. Going forward meant facing these two head-on. Mark's grip on her hand tightened. "Stay behind me." Her voice was barely a whisper. "What are you going to do?" "Whatever I have to," he said. And in that moment, the cold seemed to fade, not because it was warmer, but because Mark had made a choice. The campfire ahead flickered in the mountain wind, throwing long shadows against the jagged rocks. Two hunters sat near it, their faces hidden under heavy hoods. Weapons rested within arm's reach. Gleaming faintly in the FIRELIGHT, Mark crouched behind a boulder. The girl pressed close to his side. The storm clouds above had begun to gather, and snowflakes drifted down, carried by the rising wind. "They're blocking the only path," Mark whispered. The girl's eyes darted toward the fire. "If we go closer, they'll see us. If we stay here, the others will catch up." Mark knew she was right. The hunters behind them would be climbing by now, following their footprints through the snow. Time was running out. He scanned the ridge. On one side was the narrow path with the campfire. On the other was a sheer drop into darkness. There was no safe way around. The girl's hand trembled in his. "You should leave me here," she whispered. "If they see you alone, they might let you go." Mark shook his head sharply. "Not happening." Her eyes glistened. "Why? You don't even know me." He looked at her for a long moment. "I know enough. You've had enough people walk away from you. I'm not adding my name to that list." Before she could answer, the wind shifted and carried their scent straight toward the fire. One of the hunters stiffened. His head lifted slowly, nostrils flaring. Then he rose to his feet, his hand closing around a long blade. Mark didn't wait. He grabbed the girl's hand and ran forward, staying low. Snow crunched under their boots, the cold air burning in his lungs. The first hunter shouted. The second leaped to his feet, snatching up a rifle. A shot rang out, the sound exploding in the cold air. The bullet hit the snow near Mark's foot, sending ice shards flying. He reached the fire just as the first hunter lunged with his blade. Mark sidestepped and shoved the burning log from the fire into the man's chest. The hunter roared, dropping the blade and tearing at his smoking coat. "Run!" shouted to the girl. She bolted up the path. The second hunter swung his rifle toward her, but Mark slammed into him before he could fire. The two tumbled into the snow, rolling dangerously close to the cliff's edge. The hunter was strong and humanly so. But Mark fought with the desperation of someone who had no other choice. He grabbed a fistful of snow and slammed it into the man's face. Then kneed him hard in the ribs. The man growled and swung wildly, catching Mark in the jaw. Pain flared white in his vision. Somewhere above, the girl screamed. Mark twisted, forcing the rifle out of the hunter's hands. The man lunged again, but Mark used the momentum to throw him off balance. The hunter staggered once in, then slipped on the icy rock. For a heartbeat, Mark saw his wide eyes in the firelight. Then he fell backward into the darkness, his scream swallowed by the wind. The first hunter had recovered and was climbing toward the girl. Mark grabbed the fallen rifle and fired, the shot echoing through the mountains. The bullet struck the ground near the man's feet. Forcing him back, Mark scrambled up the path, reaching the girl just as the snow around them began to whip into a frenzy. The storm had arrived. The wind howled, carrying icy shards that stung their skin. The path ahead was barely visible, just a faint line in the white blur. They'll keep chasing. The girl shouted over the storm. Mark pulled her close, his voice steady despite the chaos. Then we keep moving. Together. They pushed into the blizzard, each step a battle against the wind. Behind them, the remaining hunters' shouts faded into the storm, swallowed by the roar of nature itself by the time they reached the next ridge. The fire was long out of sight. The storm covered their tracks almost instantly, wiping away any sign they'd passed. The girl stumbled, and Mark lifted her into his arms without slowing. Her head rested against his shoulder, and even through the howling wind, he heard her whisper, "You didn't leave me." Mark's chest tightened. "I told you I wouldn't." Hours later, as dawn broke over the mountains, they found a small cave sheltered from the wind. Mark set her down gently, starting a small fire with the last of his fuel. The flames lit her face, and for the first time since he'd found her in the snow, she smiled a real, unguarded smile. "Are we safe?" she asked. Mark stared into the flames for a moment. "For now. And as long as I'm breathing, I'll keep it that way." Outside, the storm raged on, erasing every trace of the path they had taken. The hunters might still be out there, somewhere, beyond the white. But for now, in the glow of the fire, there was warmth. And for the girl who once stood alone in the snow, there was finally someone who stayed.